Hello everybody, this is our fifth webinar in series of Autodesk Up and Ready IQ. In this series of webinars deal and explain Autodesk product installation and licensing issues. Current webinar is related to the Autodesk product installation log file analysis. Presentation will be presented by Jeremy Hansen, who is a product support specialist on Autodesk installation licensing team. My name is Abtu Chachawa. I'm a senior product specialist on Autodesk installation licensing team.
I'd like to thank everybody again. Again, my name is Jeremy, and I am on the installation licensing team at Autodesk. So before we get things rolling, actually, you know what? I'm going to advance here. Yeah, still. Go ahead, Abtu.
Yes, and in this, the way the webinar works is, we have like about a 30-minute presentation where Jeremy is going to show you tips and tricks how to read and identify valuable information into the installation log files, how to find the log files, as well as we have another 30 minutes to answer your questions. You can also type out your questions in questions panel on the webinar panel, and we'll try to answer you right away during the webinar session. I'll pass on to Jeremy, and Jeremy can continue. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Once again, this is Jeremy. I'm with the Autodesk installation and licensing team, and today we'll be covering installation log files, setup logs, and install logs both. So before we get things rolling, I'd like to ask a quick poll question just to get an idea of how many of you have at least played around with the install log. So that poll should come up on your screen. We'll give you 30 seconds or so to answer that. Give a yes or no if you've actually gone in and tried to look through the install logs to try to find an issue and troubleshoot it. Yeah.
Have you ever looked into the installation log files to try to troubleshoot an installation error? Okay, it's about 90% of the attendees responded to the poll questions, and the results are as follows. Like 71% says yes, and 30% says no.
All right, very well. Thank you for participating in that poll. So it sounds like a lot of you have at least looked into this before, so hopefully we'll cover some things you don't already know today, and for the rest of you who haven't had a chance to look at it, this will be all new to you. So let's get into the meat of things here. So say you've just received your shiny new Autodesk product. You're excitedly installing it on your computer. You're probably quivering with anticipation at this great new software that you're going to get to use. Everything's going well so far. You've gotten past the product key and serial number part. You've selected the software you want to install if you have a suite, if you don't want to install everything from that. And now you're to the point where things are actually installing, feeling good. But what do you do when this turns into this? Installation complete. Some products failed to install. You have a bunch of red X's there, several failed, and something went wrong. You might have gotten an error message that popped up that gives you at least some clue as to what's going on, but sometimes it'll just go straight to here and you don't have any idea what on earth happened. So how do you even start trying to troubleshoot an issue like this? Well, log files to the rescue. So just about any program that you install on your computer is going to create one or more log files, and Autodesk software is no exception. So when an install goes bad, log files can give you the information you need to fix the problem. Sometimes, like I said, you'll get an error message. Sometimes you get nothing. So log files are going to be your only source of information as to what on earth happened to cause the install error. So if you can find the install error message, you're halfway to fixing it. But again, the log files, they're useful, but they're only useful if you can understand them. So hopefully what we go through today will help you get a better understanding as to what the log files contain and how exactly to spot any errors that may crop up. So Autodesk software creates two types of log files. There's a setup log and an install log. So the setup log is really just a summary of everything that gets installed. It includes the prerequisites that are required for the Autodesk software, things like Microsoft.NET, Microsoft C++. So these are things that aren't actually Autodesk products, but if they're not installed on the computer, the Autodesk product can't run. The Autodesk software depends on these to be installed already, so that's why they're prerequisites. And also includes information about the actual Autodesk software that gets installed. So on that previous screen where it said some products failed to install, there were some links to installation log file that you can click on. This is what it will open. It will open the setup log. It will not open the install logs themselves, just the setup log to at least give you an idea of what particular part of the install may have had the error. So then there are install logs, and that gives you much more detailed information about each product that is installed during the process. So you'll have one setup log. If you're installing like a building design suite, there will be one setup log for the entire suite that covers everything, but then each individual component will have its own install log. So the install logs are much longer usually than the setup log. They contain very helpful information, pinpointing the specific file, registry key, whatever that's causing the error, but they're usually a little harder to read than the setup log, and honestly harder to find in the install log also. So I just want to give you an idea of when you install, for example, this is a building design suite install. These are all the files that will get in your temp folder when this installs. So it can be a challenge to come in here and this is going to be mixed in with all the other things that are already in your temp folder. So just want to give you an idea of exactly how many files are getting created here during the install process. And again, this is just the log part of it. This isn't even the actual install files that are happening. So it can be quite a challenge sometimes to locate exactly which file it is that you're looking for. So let's dig a little deeper into the setup log. So the install logs created by Autodesk software, both the setup and the install log, are going to be located in the Windows temp folder, which you can get to by going to Start Run and typing %temp%. On Windows 8, just click on the Windows logo down at the bottom left to get out into the modern view, and then type that %temp%. That'll take you into the into the temp folder. And the naming convention is going to be the product name setup.log. So let's take a look again into this folder where all the files from the install are. And so as you can see, there's quite a few files in here. So how do you narrow down which one it is you're looking for if you want to find the setup log? Well, what you can do is there should only be in here one file that has the word setup in it. If this is in your regular temp folder, you're not going to have just the files specific for the Autodesk software, so there may be multiple setup logs. So at that point, you want to start typing in the actual name of the product, so we know this was the building design suite. And so there we go. So that's another way to isolate the the setup log if you have a bunch of files in there that you're trying to narrow down to which exact one is the setup log. So again, that provides success and failure information for each installation component. So it doesn't provide a lot of detail as to what the actual error is that's happening. Let's take a quick look at one here just so you can see an idea of what I'm talking about. So this is in the prerequisite section here. Basically, everything down through all the page open stuff is just kind of initial setup. It's not the actual installing part. So you want to go down just below all these page open lines, and this is where the actual meat of the installation stuff happens. So again, you can see it's installing a Visual C++, succeeded, another version of Visual C++, succeeded, and then this one did happen to have an install failure. So you see down here, failed for the BIM 360. We'll get into more detail about that particular error in a little bit here. But again, so it tells you whether it works or not. It doesn't really give you great information as to why it didn't work. This gives you kind of a generic 1603 error. So that doesn't tell you a whole lot. That just basically means it didn't install. So that's not going to give you all the information you're going to need. So there's also a couple of different I guess, types you'd call it of setup logs depending on how you install the software. So if you select either install now or download now to install the software, that will use a download manager, and so the setup log will include information about the download in addition to the actual installation itself. So here's one where you can see this, again, this is an infrastructure design suite setup log. So they're installing quite a few products, and you can see, let's just take, for example, we'll do the Visual C++. It's kind of in code here, so it's a little harder to tell exactly what it's talking about, but basically it's this Visual C++ Update 3. So it has information about the download part as well as the installation of it. So it's a little more complicated to read, but sometimes the install can fail due to a download failure, so that's why it includes the information about the download. And if you're not familiar with the install now or download now methods, they actually install, at least install now does it, installs while the software is downloading. So it's very important to have that download information in the setup log, just in case you have some sort of connection error that happens, and that's why it's failing, not actually due to the software itself. So it can be very helpful to determine why exactly that's failing. And the browser download just provides the information about the install. Again, this is the same log file we were in earlier. So there's nothing about downloading here, just simply it's installing and whether it's installed or not. Now, you know what basic structure of the setup log, but it's really important to know how to find the errors in the setup log. So let's go ahead and open the setup log again. And this one is going to be for the Infrastructure Design Suite 2015. Again, this is the one where they did the install now, so it's got the information about the download. So it's got a lot of information in here, but if you have an install failure, the only thing you're really interested in is what on earth failed. So the first thing I suggest, the easiest way to find the error is to search for fail. So sometimes the failure message will say failed, or it will say failure. So if you search for failed, it's going to cover both of those. So let's do a find here, and we'll search for fail, and there we go. We can see which aspect of the install failed. We can see it was this Vim 360. So again, the error number is usually pretty generic here in the setup log, so we're going to need to dig into a little more detail. We get into that in the install log section. And one thing I want to point out here is you really want to disregard any errors that you see in this rollback section. So when the install fails, the software is going to try to roll back all the stuff that it just installed. So you may have experienced that yourself. You get down to like 1 or 2 of 60 some products remaining. Suddenly something goes wrong, and then you get to sit there watching everything roll back and undo everything you just sat there through. So this is what that part is covering, and usually you'll see 1 or more errors in the rollback, but that's fine. So the rollback isn't really important as to what is causing the install to fail. Almost always in the rollback you'll see that the Visual C++ items fail to roll back. The reason being that this is usually already installed before you're trying to install this Autodesk software. So the Visual C++ installer reports back to the Autodesk installer, hey, there's nothing to roll back to, and it counts that as failure. But that doesn't actually have anything to do with why the install is failing. So you always want to get in here and look above the rollback section for the actual error message. So that's why I suggest start your search at the very top and search for fail, because it's usually the first fail in the log file that's going to be the one that's actually causing the install to fail. All right, so we've learned pretty much all we can from the setup log. It's told us which product is failing, but not really a reason. It gives a result 1603, and that doesn't really tell us much as to why on earth this is failing. So how do we find out more information? Well, that's where the install log comes in. So let's take a deeper look at the install log. Again, this is going to be located in the Windows temp folder, start run % or temp%. And similar naming convention to the setup log, except that instead of having the word setup, it's going to be install. So pretty simple. Not every install log is going to conform to that, but the vast majority of them, there's a few products that have a little bit different naming convention. Sometimes it doesn't have spaces, things like that. But if you search for the word install, that's going to bring up your install logs. So each component, again, has its own install log. So you'll have one setup log, but you can have a bunch of install logs. So here's, again, the install from the Building Design Suite Ultimate. You can see there's AutoCAD. This is the AutoCAD 2015 Language Pack. It has its own install log, AutoCAD itself, the AutoCAD Product Specific Pack. So there's a bunch of install logs to get set up in here, but only a single setup log. So that's why it's very important to look through the setup log first to determine exactly which product is failing, because if you go straight to the install log and you're installing a suite like this and you have all these install logs, it'll take you much longer to figure out what exactly the error is, because you don't even know which particular part of the install is failing most likely at this point. So again, it provides detailed install steps, and unlike the setup log, it will usually have specific error messages. It can lead you to exactly which file is having the problem, which registry key it's failing on, if there's any registry permissions, or in the case of what we're going to see in this upcoming log, it will show you why the BIM 360 add-in is failing to install. So how on earth do you spot errors in the install log? So let's open one up here. And again, this is a relatively short install log, but if you look at this one will take a little second to open up here. This one is huge. So this one is actually for AutoCAD 2014. And this one, you can see from the size of the scroll box over here that we got a long ways to go down here. So it's all kinds of information in here, which is all very interesting, but most of it has nothing to do with why the install failed. So how on earth do you figure out in here why this install failed? How do you narrow down on that information? Well, Microsoft has been nice enough to create this WI logs utility. So it's Windows installer logs. Basically what it will do is it will analyze an install log. If it finds an error in it, it will spit that error out at you. So let's go ahead and launch that. Oh, it's included with the Windows SDK, so you can't just download it by itself. You have to install the Windows SDK, and that's available from this link here. The slide deck will be made available on our Box account, so you can have all these links if you need them later on. But again, for right now, let's just go ahead and launch it. I'll show you how this cool little tool works. So it just comes up here with not much so far. It asks you to select the log file name. So let's browse for a log here. And I am going to bring up the BIM 360 log, because we want to take a look at why it failed on the BIM 360. We know it did because of that initial setup log we looked at, but we don't know exactly why it failed on that. So once we've selected the log file, click on Analyze, and boom, there we are. It immediately finds the relevant portion of the install log. So we can see from here, it tells you it's doing a launch conditions action. So basically it's looking for certain conditions to be set certain ways in order to launch the installer for the BIM 360 add-in. And we can see it's starting the launch conditions, and here we go. Here's the error message. So product, Autodesk BIM 360 Revit 2015 add-in 64-bit. A newer version of the software is already installed. Well, I happen to know this with this particular error, you do get an error message during the install process, but you only get this much. You get a newer version of this software is already installed. Well, if you're installing Building Design Suite, you've got potentially dozens, or close to dozens anyway, of programs that are installing. You don't have any idea which one it's complaining about being newer than the one that's already installed. Well, here's how you find it. You look in the install log, and that will tell you right there. So this WI logs has another kind of cool way to look at the install log. If you find the error message and you want a little more context to it, it's helpful to be able to look at the entire log. So if you click on this HTML log button, this will show you the log file in a little bit easier to read format. It's got color coding and things like that. So it's not quite as bad as simply opening the log file in Notepad and looking at plain text. It's, little fancier, I guess, but it has some handy buttons up here, in particular this first one, first error. So let's say you're opening up a gigantic install log like that one I just showed you earlier for the AutoCAD 2014. And it's going to have all kinds of information down here, and you're like, well, great, now I'm back here, and how do I find the error that it just showed me? Well, if you just click on first error, it actually highlights the error here for you, so it'll take you straight to the error message. So it tells you look a few lines above for clues on error, and there we are. That's the error right there. A newer version of this software is already installed. So this can be very helpful in determining exactly where in this huge install log the error is happening, as well as giving you a little context as to maybe what's going on beforehand, to kind of see what step of the install process the install is failing on. It might help if the actual error itself is still a little bit unclear. But what do you do if the WI logs utility doesn't find any errors? I mean, sometimes there's an error somewhere in this install log, but you put it in here, you hit analyze, and it says no errors found. How on earth do you find it now? Well, you're down to you get to search through the install log yourself. So let's bring up the install log. And again, this is a relatively short one, so this wouldn't be quite as bad as some others, but still, this is a lot to plow through if you don't really have any idea where this error is happening in the log. So there's a couple of search tips I have for you that can make it a lot easier to narrow in on exactly where this is failing. So if you do a search for disable rollback, usually, not always, but usually this will get you pretty close to where the install is actually failing. Now, this disable rollback is going to be in here a few times first because the installer checks to see what the value is set to for disable rollback. So this tells it if there's an error, can I roll back all the stuff I just installed? If it's set to 0, that means yes, it can. It means it is not disabled. So this installer is going to check for that right at the beginning, and it will also check for it again when the error itself happens, just to make sure it doesn't change somehow in between when it did the initial check. So the initial one isn't going to show us anything, so we're going to need to do this a few more times. So let me bring this up so we can see the whole thing. All right. So we did a second one, and there we go. We can actually see that the error is here. But again, now we have the same error that was in the setup log. So that didn't help in this case. Usually it will help. But this particular, the BIM 360 install log, it doesn't check the disable rollback right after the install happens. It does it more toward the end here. And at the end, it just gives you this generic install error, 1603. Doesn't really do you much good. So the other thing I suggest searching for is return value 3. So if you search for disable rollback, you still can't narrow down on it. Let's do a search for return value 3. So there's a couple of different return values you can get. You can see up here there's a return value 1. If it's 1, that means excellent, it worked. Everything installed fine, we're good, let's move on to the next thing. If you get a return value 3, on the other hand, something bad happened, didn't install properly, it didn't meet the conditions it was looking for, didn't install. So we found the return value 3, and there it is, right above it. This is the error we saw in the WI logs utility. Autodesk BIM 360, Revit 2015 added 64-bit, newer version of software is already installed. So we finally found it here. So let's take a look at a little bit longer install log here. This is back to the AutoCAD 2014. If we search for disable rollback, we're going to find it again. It'll show the policy up here, and it'll be a few more times in here. And it can be a little bit annoying to go through, several ones, and you might be hitting search too many times, and you just go past the right error that you're looking for. Well, there's a nice way that you can kind of narrow in even more on where you want to start your search for disable rollback. The error message itself, the important one that actually gives you the details, is almost always going to be in the MSI section. So you'll see all these lines that start with MSI. Let me enlarge this just to make this a little bit easier to read. At the very end, there's a little short MSI section, but that's not the section we're looking for. We're actually looking for this really long MSI section in the meat of the install log here, right in the middle section. It'll be just above the properties section. So it'll be this long list of properties toward the end of the install log. So I'll usually scroll down to the bottom of the install log and then just scroll on up until you find the top of the properties section. Click to put the cursor right at the very beginning of that first properties line, and then do your search for disable rollback. But we're going to do a direction up this time instead of down. So we're going to be searching from the top of the property section on upward. Usually the last error in the MSI section, or close to the last error anyway, is going to be the one that you're looking for. So here we found disable rollback is 0, and sure enough, we have an error message right here. So assembly error %1, and it tells you down here what that %1 stands for. It's not a valid Win32 application. So we've narrowed in on the error, and we know at least now we have something to search for. You know, we can search for this product code here, or we can search for it's not a valid Win32 application. It gives us something to search for. I'm not going to get into the details of how exactly to fix the error. If you're interested in how to actually fix install errors, I encourage you to come to our webinar in a couple of weeks where we'll be covering the various install errors, some of the more common and a few less common ones. That one I think is coming up in about 2 weeks here. So that's pretty much how to spot an error in the install log. Again, the error message, unlike with the setup log, it's usually specific and hopefully actionable by that. And I mean, it gives you something to search for at least, instead of just a generic 1603 and you don't know what on earth is going on. It doesn't really tell you anything if you just have a 1603 error other than it didn't install. All right, so there's another type of install log that gets created, and that's install logs for service packs. Now, the fun thing about service packs is that they will not create an install log by default. You have to enable verbose logging in order to get a log file for a service pack. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. If you're feeling adventurous and you're comfortable with editing the Windows registry, we have some instructions up here on our website that will show you how to create the, we go into the registry, you actually have to create a new key because it doesn't even exist to start with, and then you set the value for voice warm up and all that. So that's a little bit involved for some people, for a lot of people honestly. I mean, editing the registry is never a fun proposition. Things can go horribly wrong. So Microsoft, once again, has been very nice and has created a fix-it tool that will enable verbose logging with the simple click of your mouse. So let's load up the site here. So how to enable Windows installer logging, basically verbose logging, another way to say that. So if you scroll down here, there's a fix-it for enable Windows installer logging, and then there's one for disable Windows installer logging. So all you have to do is click on the Microsoft Fix-It icon. It will download, run it, and accept their wonderful privacy agreement. Hit next. It's pretty quick here, just takes a few seconds. And we're almost done. Got a little progress bars that go to the end and then disappear. There we go. All right, so that did it. It's been processed. That's all there is to it. You can come in here after you're done and use the disable one. I don't necessarily recommend that simply because there's not really any downside to keeping verbose logging enabled other than, it'll create a few extra log files that you may not need, but unless you're running really low on hard drive space, it's not really going to be a problem. So I'd just say come in and enable it and leave it enabled. Even with just installing regular software, if you include the service packs when you're installing it, so if you're installing a suite and you go in and have it download the service pack for Autodesk during the install process, this will let you get the log files for that. So it's not just if you already have the product installed and now you're trying to install a service pack that this is useful. It can be when you're actually just initially installing the software. So I'd really suggest leaving verbose login enabled all the time. And these aren't quite as user-friendly as far as the naming convention goes. They're called, it will start with MSI, and it will have a code, which is just kind of a series of letters and numbers that varies by product, and it doesn't really make any sense. The code doesn't match what the product is. It's just kind of a random code, seems to me anyway, that gets created. And then it ends with .log. And unlike with the setup and install logs, this actually is a capital LOG. Why it's that way for the MSI logs and not for the setup and install, I'm not really sure, but that's just the way it is. So again, this will create an install log, but not a setup log. I mean, you're installing a service pack, so there's not really a reason to have a setup log because you're only installing one thing at this point. So it will create an install log. It's got almost exactly the same structure as a regular install log. So let's bring one up here. This is again, this is one that actually got installed as part of the Building Design Suite Ultimate, so it included a service pack for Revit 2015 during the install process. And you can see it's got more or less the same components to it as the regular install log. It's got all the MSI section. It'll have the properties section at the end here. And so it's pretty similar. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot more detail about that one. The only thing that is different is that it doesn't include disable rollback anywhere in it. So when you're doing your search, your only option really to narrow it down is to search for return value 3. So run that through the WI logs utility first. Usually that will pull out the error. If it doesn't, then you're down to doing your search for return value 3. If you're unfortunate enough that you don't get a result on return value 3, it's kind of slog through it and see what you can find, kind of thing. But almost always you'll get something with WI logs or return value 3 on the log files for your service packs there. So now that you've gone through your logs and you've finally pinpointed the error message, what now? What do you do with it? How do you actually get to a solution from that step? Well, we have a few places where you can search. I'd grab that specific error message. Usually any knowledge article that we create is going to have the exact error message in it. So once you have that, you're almost to the solution by that point, unless it's a new issue, which is always fun. But so first thing I would suggest is go to either knowledge.autodesk.com or www.autodesk.com. Honestly, the search on knowledge, I tend to not get as relevant of results on that one, so I would suggest really starting with www.autodesk.com. Do a search there, again, for the specific error message text that you got, and usually that will pull up the knowledge article that contains the fix for how to do it. Autodesk.com also will search the forums. If you want to search just see what other users are saying about the error message, you can go straight to forums.autodesk.com and do your search there. But those will be included in your Autodesk, your www.autodesk.com results, but they'll be mixed in with all the other results. So this Autodesk.com itself will also search knowledge.autodesk.com and the forums. So you get all three of those just by searching Autodesk.com. Another place I would strongly suggest that you not only search for your error message, but just go there on a regular basis is our Up and Ready blog site. This is a blog site that we have here at the installation licensing team. So a lot of times fixes will go up on Up and Ready even before the actual formal knowledge article shows up on Autodesk.com. And we'll also have just general tips and tricks, and if we know of any special short free software deals that are going on, we'll sometimes post those up there too. So I definitely encourage you to not only search on that site for your error message, but just bookmark it and go there fairly regularly. And another couple of places to search here is if you've gotten a specific install error number. A lot of times these two sites from Microsoft can be very useful. So this first one shows you the Windows installer error messages. So say you got that 1603. Well, let's see what it has to do with 1603. Yeah, being held in use by system restart may require. Well, yeah, okay. doesn't really help us a whole lot, but at least it gives us some sort of idea as to what a 1603 might mean. But if you get any sort of other different error number, this will at least tell you what the error number means. It's still not even always easy to understand, but at least it gives you some idea as to, it's better than just a number. It kind of tells you what exactly that error number is talking about. And then sometimes this is another one where it's similar error codes, but it's actually not quite the same. These are system error codes as opposed to installer error codes. So usually you'd come here if not necessarily during the install process, but once the software is installed, if you launch it and then you get some sort of error number that comes up, then this site will usually have an error, give you an explanation as what the error number means if you get just a generic error number that pops up. Other things you can do, sorry about that, go back. If you've looked through the setup log and determined that it's failing on one of the prerequisites, say like the C++ 2012 is failing to install, but you know that C++ 2012 is installed and working fine in the computer, and you've done an uninstall and a reinstall of it, and it still fails. Sometimes you can go in and edit the setup INI to remove the prerequisite of the C++ 2012 from installing. Again, I won't go into detail on that too much today. We'll go into more detail on that in the install errors webinar in a couple of weeks. But that is one option. So if you remove it from the setup INI, it just won't even try to install during the Autodesk software installation. It'll just completely skip over that part and assume it's already installed. And if you tried all that, you've done your search, not finding any good solutions to it, final option, open a support case. We'll contact you and we'll work with you to find a solution. And if it's something that we haven't come up with before, that's when we create a knowledge article, and hopefully the next person who has that error, when they do their search, that fix is going to show up. All right, so that's about it for as far as install and setup logs go. I hope you've learned something useful that you didn't know. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them down in the chat. It should be at the bottom right of your webinar window. The slide deck will be posted at this address here afterwards if you want to have that available to run through yourself. I'll also upload some of the log files that we looked through here to that location so you can kind of follow along and see if you can find those errors also, test doing your searches and using that WI logs utility. And as I said, hope you learned something new, and thanks for listening. All right, Avto, I'll turn it over to you for the Q&A session.
Thank you very much again, for attending this webinar, and I truly hope that you find it very valuable in attending this webinar, and you really found some hints and tips and tricks, how to find and identify the errors within the log files. HTTPS, that URL you see on the slide right now, that's where you can find the PowerPoint slides for this particular webinar, and you can also see that since it was a 5th webinar, has a number 5. If you just go back like up under the IQ4, going to take you to a previous webinar, PowerPoint slides up under the IQ3, the 3rd webinar, and so on and so forth. And if we try to kind of keep these webinars going every week, except US Thanksgiving and Autodesk University Week. That's when we won't have it, most likely, but we may change our ideas about that. Now, related to the questions, which came during this webinar, so one of the Timothy was asking, for example, where was when one could find all the other webinar information, like previous slides, recordings, and so. That's exactly where you can find. I did share the URLs through the chat to everyone, so you should be able to see those in the questions and answers panel of the webinar panel, as well as, again, as I said, you can just change the number at the end of the URL, and you can go back to the webinar you were interested in. Other questions was related to Autodesk Civil 3D 2015 installation. Unfortunately, that's the known issue. It's basically when Civil 3D 2015 is installed on a system, it's not happening to everyone actually. It's not like 100% reproducible, but it does happen so that when Civil 3D is installed from a Point product installer as well as Infrastructure Design Suite 2015 installer, user who installs the product is able to use the product fine. But any other user on the same system may have some issues, particularly with the ribbon not showing up properly, and there is working on for it as a Autodesk case knowledge base article, and I've shared the link to the article to all of you guys. Regarding the temp folders, temp folder where the installation logs can be found is the user's temp folder who does the installation, who tries to install Autodesk product. If you are using the GPO or SCCM installation, which is using the systems account to install Autodesk products, so you be able to kind of find relevant installation log files into the Windows system temp folder, which is C Windows temp. At the same time, I would like to mention here that installation through the GPO currently is not supported by Autodesk. We support just a regular installation, regular network deployments of Autodesk product, and SCCM installation. Then another question was related to the verbose logging. By default, the verbose logging is not enabled on any of the systems unless one goes there and enables by himself through the registry, modifying the registry key mentioned during this presentation, as well as using Microsoft Fixit tool to enable and set that registry key for you. A reason why it's not enabled is that after enabling it, and if you do any kind of installation on your system, it really accumulates lots of installation log files, and installation log files can be really big. For example, if you install let's say Building Design Suite Ultimate 2015, just the installation log files during deployment creation. Deployment creation also creates the log files as well. It's about half a gig of size. It's like over 450 megabytes of data. Now imagine, if you do on your system, lots of different installations, uninstallations, and you collect all this data in your temp folder, you're going to run out of space really quickly. So that's why, the voice warm-up and enabling the verbose logging by default is not suggested, and you can only enable it, when you suspect that you have a problem and you would like to troubleshoot a failed installation. So that's the only reason you need to kind of open it up to set the verbose logging to collecting log files and send it to Autodesk, or try to understand and read through yourself. And then once you find out a workaround or solution for it, you can kind of disable the verbose logging to preserve some disk space. Now the question is when Autodesk installations will be able to adapt components already installed on the system. Now that's a really good question, and the question. So to answer the question, it's like that, I don't want to blame anybody else, but so basically, the main problems, with the installations are prerequisites. That's when installation rollback starts. And that happens, usually with C++, redistributable installations, and each product, Autodesk product, has its own prerequisites. Specific hotfix number for the Visual C++ redistributables, which it expects to find on your system, and if it's not able to find it there, then it tries to install it, and it's shipped away the product installer. Now, what happens, when on a system is there's a higher version of the same product installed on the Windows side. Let's say higher patch is installed. The Windows installer is not able to install it for you. So and that's a kind of limitation how the Microsoft has it on it. And when the product is created, let's say if you're creating a product today in the product installer, you cannot really anticipate, 6 months later, what kind of hotfix is going to come out, to let the installer know that, you can bypass this hotfix. But that's why it's only shipped with the hotfixes currently available, and they need it for the product successful installation and operation after that. That's why it's kind of like yes and no question answer for that. Like something that can be done, but lots of things are really not of our hands are tied to kind of fully resolve the case, that type of issues. Okay, so where the deployment, during the deployment installation, where the log files go. During the deployment creation, basically when you're creating a deployment, you have an option specifying, where would you like deployment to write up your log files. Now, that specific location, whichever you specify, by default it goes to a deployment shared folder and logs folder. There will be a logs folder. In that folder, up to deployment installation, deployment setup log files are stored. So if you look into those log files there, so you'll find how many users on which systems were able to install deployment this particular deployment. And if it rolls back a deployment or has a problem in one of the systems, you'll see the setup log type of information into deployment log files. But specific component installation log files, such as like C++ installation log files, such as product-specific installation log files, hotfix, material library installation log files, you'll be still able to find them under the temp folder of the user who is trying to install that product through the deployment. Another question, when installing the suite, why don't we have a common section so it only tries to install C++, DirectX, etc. Once instead of for each product? Again, there's a different teams in Autodesk, who are working on different products, and the products are built independently, and each product during the building of the product, they create and test in a specific environment, and they have their own specific prerequisites. So the installation, and when the suite is put together, that information is sent to the common installer, and that installer kind of tries to create and make sure that the prerequisites are there for each product. And for example, if you have a common installer like and you're installing everything for C++ related once, you can do it manually, by the way. If you go to a product installer and go to a third-party folder, there you'll see all the relevant C++ the distributables, their hotfixes, .NET Framework, DirectX, and many other ones, whichever is needed. And one can do it manually if he wants to, but deployment and development team believes that that's the better way of kind of associating each prerequisite to a product and ship it this way. And does the antivirus needs to be shut off? Yes, because there are certain antiviruses which really doesn't cooperate well with Autodesk product installations, such as, let's say, Trend Micro, Avast antivirus. Trend Micro is a very common, like if you ever seen an error message saying like can't device or file cannot be accessed. So that means that a Trend Micro is kind of blocking something there. And sometimes with Trend Micro, you need to disable it. But oftentimes in a corporate environment, the end users, even though they may be given the admin rights on their local systems, are not able to disable the Trend Micro. And in that case, they can either contact their local IT or uninstall the product, Trend Micro. And after product installation, you can reinstall the Trend Micro. Then there is no problem. Another thing, like with the antivirus, antivirus virus definitions updates, regularly, and you never know, which definition can hinder Autodesk product installation. That's why, the better way is to kind of have it disabled during the product installation. Okay. That was related to the antivirus. Can service packs be MSI instead of exe files? Now, the service packs itself, they are not MSI files, but most of the service packs, again, it's based, how the development team builds and compiles the service packs for you. You will be able to extract MSP file out of it. And if you look into the README files for some service packs, it usually has that instruction how to do it. It's basically like a service pack exe file space /e for extracting and space, then you can type name of your MSP file. So once you have MSP file, you can install it as MSI file. You can either double click on it, or you can use the command line switches with MSI exec, whatever the switches you want, if you want to and record the log files from there too. But that's we will have, I believe, Jeremy is next presentation which will be a couple of weeks from now. We'll have service pack installation covered as well here.
Yes, it will include that.
Yeah. And I also touched base the service pack installations in our previous webinar, when we talked about the network deployments, and we explained, how service packs can be added to a network deployment and how it's going to be, and how the MSP files can be extracted out from exe files as well. So, Timothy, that webinar will be posted, as soon as it's created, basically, and I'm hoping, by end of this week, or at the by start of the next week, that should be open for registration. We also are thinking, sending the invite for up and ready webinar series, so that if you sign up once, you will be notified in every upcoming webinars as well, and you don't need to sign up for each webinar. I think if you sign up once, you'll be able to just follow up, and just don't treat it as spam our webinar invites, our reminders when you get. We try to reach as many customers as we can with these webinars to have them and equip them with enough knowledge to troubleshoot installation issues. And I understand it's going to be a very frustrating experience, when you're troubleshooting installation problems. While you expect programs to be installed that run right away by click of the button. But you have to also understand that, every Autodesk product, before it's commercially released, is going through the heavy testing period and process, and we verify that product installation is good and solid, and it's going to be installed on almost all supported operating systems in a supported hardware configuration. And you can also, we also have lots of information on our website, which products are supported on what type of configuration. Okay, we are about to end this webinar. Thank you very much, everybody, again, once more, for attending this webinar. And please keep in mind that every week we'll have webinars, and you'll be able to register yourself on those upcoming webinars.